Hey everyone, welcome to Pit Stops To Podium, the RevPartners podcast, where we talk to execs who have competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tollison. I serve as the co-founder and CEO of RevPartners, and I'm delighted to have with me today Rick Zullo for this episode of Pit Stops To Podium. Welcome, Rick.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you. For those that may not know who Rick currently is a co-founder and general partner of Equal Ventures. Rick, so I'd love to give you the opportunity to share with our audience a little bit about who Equal Ventures is and ultimately the origin story of Equal. How did you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've been investing in private technology companies for a little over 10 years now, formerly consulting and PE, made the way to venture about a decade ago. And along that route, I realized that if you were a founder building a company for traditional IT buyers in the Valley, selling to CIOs and CTOs, venture was actually a fairly adequate product. You had venture investors who could come in with a prepared mind. Maybe they built companies in that category, selling to that base. They certainly knew a handful of customers who understood the market dynamics happening there. They could introduce you to recruits. They probably knew the M&A buyers. And that created a good sense of partnership between the investors and founders in those companies. Now, as we've entered this phase where software is eating the world, or what we like to say is the technology deployment period, where technology is starting to be adopted by a lot of these, non-technology industries that, selling to non-digitally native buyers, I found that the product that Silicon Valley provided was wholly inadequate for companies in energy or supply chain insurance. The founders that I was dealing with were going to those same rooms, having to explain the 101 of the market. There weren't any customers that they knew to. The buying patterns of the buyers that they were selling to were very, very different. So often the advice that they got was very, misguided. And that also made it really difficult for investors to get conviction without seeing data in those companies. So what I really wanted to do was just create a product for those founders, that was the same as what it had been for people selling to traditional enterprise IT. And as someone who had come up in, living in industries like energy, insurance, logistics, we really wanted to create a firm from the bottoms up that could bring a prepared mind to those industries, help founders at the earliest stage, get critical mass and get product market fit, for the first couple $1 million of sales. And that's what we set out to do when I left my last firm and started Equal back in 2019. So the firm's been around for about 3-4 years now. We've been fortunate to have, some great companies with some early breakouts like, Rapbook and Threeflow and Smarthop in the mix. But still early days, and we're a startup unlike just like any other. So.
Well, love hearing a little bit more about the origin story. And I think a fun fact for our loyal audience, you have a background with one of our past guests, right? With Bowery Capital?
Yeah. So I was Mike's first MBA intern at Bowery Capital. So nothing like leaving your old PE job to, go to a fund that was the same size as literally the last check that we had written at my PE fund. So that was the second first-time fund that I've been a part of, and now I've been a part of 3, which I'm not sure if I'm a glutton for pain or innovation.
Well, Rick, before we get into our big idea, which I think I know it's informed based off of your investment thesis and what you're seeing with your portfolio companies. We do have a tradition here at Pit Stops To Podium, and that's to get to know our guests outside of work. So what are some fun facts or whatever you may want to call it, hobbies, interests, passions that you have outside of investing in companies and watching them grow?
It may seem hard for folks to believe given this corporate haircut that I have, nowadays. But once upon a time, I was definitely someone who played in a couple of bands and, thought I was going to be a rock star someday. Fortunately, I played with some really awesome musicians along the way, including a couple who, are on the pop charts, but didn't pick up a guitar for roughly 10 years until COVID. And COVID, I had 2 kids. I had a kid just before COVID. I've had another one, since. My daughter's nearly 4. My son just turned 1. And over the course of COVID, you got to find a way to keep kids entertained.
Yeah.
And part of that meant picking up my guitar that I've had since high school. So a guitar that's north of 20 years old, that I think I bought for $100 back then. And started, play guitar for my kids every morning. And, a 4-year-old girl, a 3-year-old girl, they're not into the same, music that I was into back then or into now. So plain yellow Ledbetter, doesn't exactly, light them up. And it's very much led to me, rewriting, every single Taylor Swift or Katy Perry or Whitney Houston song that I can. So just imagine this grizzled voice singing, I want to dance with somebody, to my 3-year-old daughter, which, you got to have some fun out there. So it's not always
when you did perform, what genre and what role did you have? Were you the singer?
No, I was lead guitar. So, we do some backup vocals, but this isn't a mug that you ever want on the front face of anything. So.
That's great. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit more about you. And it's fun to your point. I mean, it seems like everyone I guess it wasn't either you pick up a hobby or you bring back something that you used to do. So thanks for sharing a little bit about your background.
And now my team is trying to find me at open mic nights, and I will not let them ever see that happen. Especially me wearing a cowboy hat or anything else.
Yeah, well, if you get in a karaoke bar, they may have to record that for their own selfish purposes.
I'm sure it would help in compensation reviews for them. So, but yeah.
Well, Rick, just let's transition into the big idea here. And I think you alluded to some of it in terms of the origin story of VC. I think there's some parallels there, which you talked about, what you saw with Silicon Valley in terms of the support they were giving was for a specific buyer. And I think one of the things you've talked about is there's not a one size that fits all, meaning there are different ways for companies to grow. And I think you have a passion around, hey, there's a vertical, there's a horizontal way to approach your go-to-market strategy. And so let's talk a little bit about that in terms of how companies should think about their growth strategy. But maybe as we get started, maybe a definer of how you think through vertical or horizontal, and then we can talk through, hey, what helps the companies understand which path to take.
Yeah, and I think this is non-obvious but very intuitive, thing to think through. That when we've created 30 years of best practices on enterprise sales for a particular buyer set, CIOs and CTOs, of technology-rich organizations that are used to buying these type of products. And, there's different ripples of that, but by and large, that is what, the kind of war chest, that the encyclopedia of sales has been built around certain types of buyer profiles. And then as we look at the industries we invest in, we only spend our time in really 4 sectors. You can imagine the buyers in climate, or what it takes to win in climate, versus supply chain or childcare or insurance, supply chain insurance. At the same time, you have 2 extremely different buyer bases, which neither of which are terribly digitally native. So I think one of the things that along the way we've discovered is that you really need to understand and relearn a lot of what will work to sell and penetrate in these industry verticals, which means that, yes, some of the existing best practices are great to learn and adopt and amend to what you have, but you have to do a tremendous amount of listening to the culture and make sure the approaches that you have in your go-to-market and scaling, are really nuanced and personalized to the complexity of that sector and the culture that it has, which is easier said than done.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to your point, and just in terms of how things are changing and making sure you adjust your approach based off the buyer that you're selling to in terms of how to approach that. So let's start with the vertical solution selling. You talk a little bit about marrying industry networks and really the relationship component of that. So what have you learned, or what are some recommendations you'd have for folks that are taking more of that approach to market?
Well, I think the tricky thing with every one of the companies that we worked with, and we've seen a lot of we've been fortunate to see a couple of companies go from pre-product to unicorn stage, over the course of that time frame that we've been investing in. And the reality is, when you're dealing with a non-digitally native buyer base in one of these verticals, the lack of trust that they have in traditional technology solutions is extremely high. I think if you're calling them up and saying, hey, we're a company based in Sand Hill Road and we're here to disrupt the industry, you're going to hear a lot of clicks, by those buyers putting the phone down. And we've seen that. I've been in the cab with truck drivers and done that customer discovery. Spent plenty of time with insurance guys, which is its own completely different sales culture, which I think one of the things that we've seen is hypercritical in those early days is making sure that they understand that you're native, not a tourist, and that often requires, folks who bring relationships to the team. Now, you got to marry that at the same time with, all the best practices and ways that you can scale a sales channel. If you look at something like insurance, extremely relationship-driven business, not just at the agent level, with consumers, but all the way up to the most executive levels in the company. You're talking about people who do deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, based on trust and relationships. So yes, you got to bring some of those relationships and trust, to be able to make that happen. But if you want to figure out how you're going to really scale that, you need to meld that with a lot of the best practices around sales ops, sales efficiency, data-driven sales processes, KPI tracking the entire way, which aren't exactly, native tools to those industries. When you talk to those folks, many of them don't use modern CRM systems. Many of them don't have a lot of the best-in-class technology, sales ops infrastructure, that you would see at a $10 million AR SaaS company. So I think the tricky thing as you're doing this is, how can you get these two seemingly opposing ideals working together? How can you bring relationships together with rigor in terms of the best practices and processes and uplift them both by making a relationship sales-driven process that also has, all the efficiency and optimization of that sales ops infrastructure? And that's what we really think is a big part of, finding new solutions and, getting adoption in places that adoption hasn't happened before.
Right.
It's bridging the divide between those two worlds.
Yeah, I think to your point, that's easier said than done. To your point of how do you, I guess the question would be, who, not necessarily who, but what are some steps that people can take to say, hey, I know I need to take that step, but I don't necessarily know how to drive that adoption, where there's a high friction as it relates to modernization or digital kind of first type of approaches. Is there something you've seen be successful within your portfolio companies, whether it's how they sell or how they embrace technology or process internally?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've done a lot of has been reducing the friction to first-time buyers and really focusing on something that's less of a sale and more of an upsell or cross-sell as part of that. So, my wife gives me a hard time because, she says, basically, you guys give away software to everyone, and then I tell her we'll stop doing it when it stops working. Because if you look at a lot of these industries, the distrust of a traditional enterprise sale or where there lacks IT budget, it can impede people from actually adopting it and the product in any way. So what we found is getting your foot in the door, creating ways that you can create value for that buyer, whether it's a tool, a product, or some type of data benchmarking solution. RiskMatch was one of the first companies that I previously worked on that we tested out of giving away or really subsidizing, lowering the price point of benchmarking analytics in the insurance industry, and using that as a wedge to establish captivity over the customer. And you realize once you have that critical mass of customers in that industry, the reality is it's nowhere near as competed away ecosystem as you would see in the horizontal spectrum. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to get into productivity or sales ops or some of these other, marketing ops, and selling to those orgs for that buyer base, they're looking at a LumaScape or a market map that has, hundreds of logos in. Most of the categories that we're looking at, they're owned by an oligopoly ERP system or a system of record, that hasn't been reinvented in the last 30, 40 years, that is terrible UX UI, low, NPS score. And if you can go and find a way to penetrate that by sitting on top or around it and use that as a way to get critical mass, you're competing against someone who's been, crawling, and you can be sprinting. So, what we really encourage companies to do is look to freemium or counterposition elements, that can get that initial mass of customers and use that as a beachhead, for actually scaling your sales approach. And, when you have that critical mass in these industries, you can fly very, very quickly, where we've been fortunate to see a couple of companies take a pretty long time to get from 0 to 1 million ARR, but then rapidly ascend from 1 to 100 in a matter of just a couple of years, with tremendous amounts of efficiency because they don't have that competition in the way. So I think that requires, again, a real deep understanding. You got to listen to the customer, figure out what are the pain points that exist in their day, that enable you to create a solution of value that will enable you to actually have a competitive position in the long-term software ecosystem that they have. I also think it really requires you to think strategically about, hey, is there a way that I can go and sell to this customer, by not taking away from their IT or adding to their IT budget, but looking for other cost centers. That company, Riskmatch, they sold to brokers. The primary means of monetization was carriers. Carriers were willing to pay, to have better data integrity, better visibility over the brokers on the platform. We had a tremendous exit with that company, sold in less than a year later to Threeflow, one of the oligopolistic agency management systems in that space. And we've executed that playbook, several times over, trying to find more network-based or freemium approaches by lowering the upfront bar on pricing, being more patient as investors, and then really when that critical mass what was achieved, accelerating forward to more monetization, which certainly, isn't easy, but often if you can get to the other side of it, is going to create some very, very, very big outcomes.
Yeah, it's great. I think to your point, there's a high barrier to entry for that segment. But I don't think anyone would argue the opportunity is certainly there once you figure out how to crack it. And I think that what you're describing is, play to that trust element to allow yourself to actually get the value added product inside the organization to then expand. So I really like that feedback. For those that,
go ahead. Like finding the customer bases that are Gordon Moore has his book Crossing the Chasm, which is always been one of my favorites. But I think in all these new markets that you're looking for, something like supply chain or insurance, they're markets that are as old as time. But the reality is the buyer base. You really need to look for those early innovators and advocates. We have a lot of those folks as LPs in our fund, because in many ways we've found that they are folks who can help identify who are going to be those early adopters who can shift behavior. And I do find that the word of mouth in these industries are incredibly high, which is the reason why we probably focus, a lot on customer success and that upsell ability and the ability to really make sure that our customers can become evangelists. Because in reality, you can access CTOs or chief product officers or executive level, folks in very, very large companies in these industries, probably with greater ease than you'd be able to, access many of the CTOs and, customer bases in other industries. They're more accessible. They hop on the phone with us all the time. We're not that special. I think we're the only person, reaching out to them from this venture capital world, which shows that there's an issue with venture capital. But the reality is, if you listen and evangelize, they want to be part of the solution. So we find that the opportunity to evangelize them. So we have, lots of customer advisory boards. We're always finding ways to show the wins that our customers are having, so that our solutions aren't cost centers to them, that they're actually, really hitting on, areas that they can be strategically relevant, that really adding revenue to the organization, showing their differentiation market, rather than just being, a cheaper solution or a way to do more things more efficiently. And I think, that evangelistic approach, but also hitting on the value drivers that they think will enable their careers, not just their companies, is something that's really important.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, which was around, to your point, the network effect is so valuable since it's so relationship oriented and the testimonials, and how do you reward those first movers or those early adopters, just because they're so critical. I think you mentioned the customer advisory board, seeking their feedback. It's just, how do you kind of enable or reward their behavior to make sure they feel valued? And so you're getting not only the feedback, but also that, megaphone to their networks.
Yeah, I think the reality is if you have to compensate your customers beyond that's a really dangerous thing. You're setting precedent and you're also setting, some potential misalignment along the way. Now, that's not to say that we haven't done it, but we don't think it's the most scalable way to grow your organization, which is one of the reasons why, we have basically the same value creation approach that we look at as lens for all companies. identify your wedge in the market to achieve critical mass, ensure that it attaches to some type of flywheel, i.e. how are you getting increasing returns to scale? How does that enable your path up, a mode or, monetization above and beyond your peers, and then expand from there. And I think as we look at, those early customers, they're taking advantage of whatever wedge we provide in the market. What is the software subsidy that we're giving them that is something that they want today, that they would have to pay for elsewhere, that they can view as a strategic lever? And the fact that they're one of the very few folks using it, it's often more strategic. Now, we try to make sure that's tied to a data network asset that grows stronger and stronger with each time that someone uses it, so that it increases the value of that product, which incentivizes them to go push that product to other folks that they're friendly with, who they don't mind being strategically, competitive with, that they recognize that there's value, in bringing those folks on. But if we keep on expanding the portfolio of products over time, those folks will just get happier and happier and happier, because their reference point is, man, I remember back 5 years ago, you guys gave me this little tool, and now you have this whole gigantic composite platform that I'm more than happy to be willing to pay for. And they've already sold you to a bunch of other customers along the way. So I think, we have some of our customers, one of our other companies in adjacent segment, Threeflow. Threeflow, follows a very similar approach to what RiskMatch did, but in the employee benefit space. Our software is 100% free to benefits brokers. We're used by some of the largest benefit brokers in the country. But some of those benefits brokers are $4, $5, $6 million ARR clients to us, because carriers are paying for it. And guess what? The carriers are now our biggest source of leads, because everyone believes in the flywheel. Yeah. Everyone's seen this go from what was once upon a time a very, very small tool into something that's a very, very powerful network, and something that we believe will be a monopolistic platform in the industry. But we've seen that evolve because all those early evangelists in the industry, have seen the product evolve and expand, with that. And they've certainly informed that direction, but we've never had to, go and try to compensate, folks along the way. It's really about making sure that we can give them something that they need today, create an incentive for them to go and bring others into that mix that will make the product better. And then expanding that product continuously, that they can see the speed of our innovation is going to be an enabler of the entire industry in their workflow, rather than just a static product that they have today. Yeah. And making sure that monetization increases, which, our customers build every single year. The NDR of that business is simply amazing.
I like it. It's continue to focus on value creation, whether it's the beginning or as the engagement continues, and that ultimately will drive the that receptivity and the willingness to work alongside the company.
In each one of these industries, the TAMs are so big that if you're finding 1-2% efficiency gains, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars. Employee benefits in the U.S. alone is $400 billion, of spend that just goes through employers. That's a tremendous amount of opportunity. You drive a little wedge, it's going to go a long way. Supply chain, retail, energy. These are $1 trillion plus segments of GDP. So if you're monopolistic in there, it's not the path from 0 to 10 million ARR that matters. It's path from 10 to a billion, which, we have some companies that have line of sight, to that billion, of revenue, mark from my days at Lightbank. And, it's exciting. And there's not that many horizontal software, companies that are ever going to get to a billion of AR. Snowflake and Salesforce, and some of those guys are going to run straight past that. But that's the exciting part about these vertical software categories, that there's a lot of room to run. If you can capture any part of the spend, rather than just being an IT solution.
I love it. I like the find your wedge, flywheel, expand. Rick, if our final lap question, if our audience wants to engage with you to learn a little bit more about either your firm or about this idea of vertical go-to-market strategy, what's the next step they can take?
Yeah, so we write very, very frequently. So I highly recommend people check out our Substack. That's available on our website, or Medium is another way to get there. We probably post industry deep dives or additional content on new business models and tactics for these vertical software industries, probably every 2 to 3 days. So like to think that we've prepared some at least well-researched content there. But folks can also, our emails are on our website, but my email is just zullo@equal.vc. And we also engage with folks pretty heavily on Twitter, where my Twitter handle is at Rick_Zullo, where we'll definitely opine on a lot of these vertical concepts, industry deep dives, and the failings of venture in the startup industry as well, which we're not afraid to ruffle some feathers since we think the game needs to be changed a little bit.
All right, I love it. Well, and also if anyone sees Rick at a karaoke bar, feel free to put that on his Twitter handle. Rick,
I'm sure I'm going to go to an insurance conference now, and I'm going to get pulled into a karaoke bar. So,
well, Rick, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights on this topic. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.